Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, mori mori wanji, namaste, jumbo. Bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so very honored and so delighted that you're joining us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show, your kids' teachers, librarians, principals, and also please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Good Pods, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Kathleen Long Bostrom. She is here to celebrate Since the Baby Came, a siblings learning to love story. Wanted to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by the books by the Toner brothers, Jim and Brad Toner, the Toner twins, especially their book, The Journey, Life Lessons with Diane the Turtle. We recently had the Toner twins on the podcast, and they were amazing. They've created this space in the Lakes region of New Hampshire, a little toy store that they call an oasis of nice. It's filled with beautiful toys, and it's also filled with their beautiful books. All of their books are just so heartwarming. The Journey, Life Lessons with Diane the Turtle. It's a perfect book for kids. It's a perfect book for high school grads, college grads. In fact, if you know somebody that's starting high school or college in just a few weeks, this is a perfect book for them. How do I know? Because I discovered the Toner brothers through my amazing college intern, Ann O'Leary. She was visiting the Lakes region. She went into the Toner twins store, just fell in love with them, fell in love with their books, and she was inspired by their books. I know that you and your loved ones would be inspired too. Hey, you should check out their website, twindesignsgiftshop.com, and also check out DianeTheTurtle.com. We love the books by the Toner brothers, Jim and Brad Toner. You're going to love them too. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by the books by Zoe Twit, Adelaide and the Cosmic Rescue Squad, and also Adelaide on Broadway. We love these books. We love the illustration. We love the fun stories that they tell. Adelaide on Broadway. Adelaide dreams of seeing her name in the bright lights on Broadway. It's too bad she has the super duper extra jittery jitters. Will Adelaide overcome her nerves in time to perform? You're going to find out, and it's going to be a great book, especially for anybody that's a little nervous about trying something that they really want to try, but they're a little nervous about it. Adelaide and the Cosmic Rescue Squad is also a really, really fun book. Adelaide discovers that she's not the only one who is afraid of the dark. In a bid to help, she calls her friends to knit a magic blanket. Will you join them in making the world brighter? Adelaide and the Cosmic Rescue Squad includes a bedtime meditation guaranteed to make you yawn. Really, these are wonderful books. Check them out today. The books by Zoe Twit, Adelaide on Broadway, and Adelaide and the Cosmic Rescue Squad. Join us right now from Southern California. Our guest is here today to celebrate her brand new children's book. It's called Since the Baby Came, a siblings learning to love story. Please welcome to the show, Kathleen Long Bostrom. Hey, Kathy, how are you?
Good to see you, Jed.
Good to see you, too. Isn't it amazing? I mean, we're in similar ages. Could you even imagine when we were younger, going to grade school, that one day you'd be sitting in California, I'd be sitting in Boston, and not only could we speak to each other through this device, but we could see each other?
No, I mean, we grew up in the days where phones were connected to the walls with a cord, and that's all they did was act as phones. And I remember when even answering machines were such a unique adventure. Indeed. We've come a long way.
Indeed. And making a call, I remember my dad, who actually worked for the phone company and got a discount on long distance would freak out if we would call Rhode Island 40 miles away. I can't imagine what it would have cost to call California.
Well, I went to seminary at Princeton in New Jersey and rarely heard from my parents because they would only call on the like night hours on a Sunday evening with a certain frame of time when it was a little cheaper, and keep the call short because we're calling long distance.
But, technology changes, but I guess the one thing that doesn't change is human nature and the relationships and the sometimes difficult relationships that siblings have.
Right. I think anyone who's had siblings can understand the ups and downs of it. And when you welcome somebody new into the family, even if you're excited, it's such an upheaval of your own life. So that's a lot of what I address in the book, is the emotional roller coaster that an older sibling can be on during that adventure and exciting and yet unknown time.
Right, right. I remember when my daughter was coming into the world, my wife and I anticipated that there might be some jealousy, and so we made sure that we did everything we could to help my son be excited about welcoming his new sibling. And even when the first time he visited his sister in the hospital, he was amazed to find out that his sister brought him this big gift. It's like, how did that all fit in there? But,
how did Mom fit all that?
And he was really touched. I mean, he was like, "Oh, you bought this for me," and he was touching. But despite that, there was still a lot of rivalry and difficulties that both of them had. They love each other, but at the same time, it was a difficult relationship.
Well, you don't really know what to expect, and I started off the book with just the announcement of the new baby, and the older child is, what is what? And then as they start to anticipate it and being, oh, this will be my best friend, and we'll do all these things, and I'll teach him this, and I'll teach him that, and gets excited, but then all of a sudden everything in the house is changing. There's cribs in his room, and his toys are pushed aside to make room for the baby's things, and so you see some of these changes going, and then you get very excited to meet the new baby, and then the baby comes home and reality really begins. So, I felt like there was just such as I mentioned earlier, roller coaster of emotions a child could feel, and I wanted to affirm all of them, that there's nothing wrong if you feel jealous, there's nothing wrong if you feel left out, that may be part of it, but children of that tiny age, young age, I'm thinking like a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, don't always know how to, they can express their feelings, we know that, but maybe not know how to really work them out. And especially when you feel like I should be loving this little baby, it's my sister or my brother, and but what about me? It's just all normal things. Mm-hmm. Emotions a child could go through, and so I just wanted to affirm that and get to a happy, at the end when they can really interact and the baby smiles for the first time at the older child. Well, that just changes everything, but it's a lot of noise and chaos, and mommy's tired, and everybody's tired, daddy's too, so.
Yeah. Now, you tell this story, or this book is a collection of 16 different poems. Is it one story that is told throughout the 16 poems, or are they just kind of standalone poems?
No, I worked really hard when I first came up with an idea to write a book of poetry. I write a lot of rhyming children's picture books, and I love poetry in all its forms. And I had been talking to a friend of mine. This was maybe 10 or more years ago when core curriculum was starting to be really important in the schools and so I asked her, because she was in educational publishing, what books in the core curriculum are kind of shortchanged? What's needed? And she said poetry. I thought, well, I love poetry. Let me think about it. So I thought it would be really fun to write a story that wasn't just told in the same kind of couplets and rhyming as most rhyming picture books are done, but to show the joy of poetry to a very young child by using different forms and to tell a story at the same time. So I kind of set myself an impossible task. It took several years to figure it out. So yes, it's a complete story. It begins with the announcement of a new baby that's told in a haiku poem. And each poem is different, but each poem moves the story along to a different point. So it definitely has the arc of a normal storybook where you start at the beginning and then there's the conflict and then there's the resolution and then there's the happy ending. So it has all of that and it's all the same characters. We talked about having a book where, with the illustration would show different characters in each. And it could have worked that way too, but I really wanted to hold the idea of it being a complete story told in 16 short poems that carried the whole arc of a story, but also in a subtle way, I think, introduce kids to the fun of poetry. Mm-hmm. In the back of the book are the names of all the different poetic formats, but it's not like kids even have to learn that. It's just more like, well, this is fun, and this is fun, and oh, you can write a poem that way. Just to make language fun, I think, was a part of my purpose in writing this book.
Well, as you're speaking and describing the book, it sounds like a book that can have a long shelf life with a family. It's a book that would be perfect for that older sibling when the new baby is coming along, something to read and help them prepare and help them deal with their different feelings that they might be experiencing. But I also think it's something that would be fun to pull out maybe a few years later and just read over the stories and then, hey, do you notice how is that poem different than this poem? And kind of talk a little bit about that and introduce kids to this idea of poetry.
Well, I hope so. I think it could be used in a lot of ways. And originally I thought of it as a book that could be used in schools. So I wanted it to be something that could introduce children to poetry just by the reading of it, or at some point, as you pointed out, to also understand the formats themselves and like, I can do this, or let's play with that and make it fun. And another way I think the book could have a good longevity past the whole arc of the story is going back to look at the story with the child, the baby, who when the baby gets a little older and reading the book and saying, oh, I remember that, or you did that when you were little. I think it could connect the kids themselves in that way. But definitely using the titles, the names of each format in the back, I think the adults can learn that for sure, and maybe the kids when they get old enough to really understand how that works.
Yeah.
So yeah, you got it right there.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it would have been a lot of fun for me. I like rhyming things. I don't ever try to tell people that I'm a poet in any way, but I do love rhyming things, and I love reading things that rhyme. And it would have been fun with my kids to get to know a little bit about what the different forms are in the names, and then maybe with my kids try to create some of those different forms.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I got the information. I had to learn all of those myself. Actually, I knew of some of the poem forms I used, but there were many I'd never heard of. Those are some of the ones I tried to use. I challenged myself to write in ways I hadn't written poetically, just to teach myself a few things. And I had a blast doing it. It was one of those books where I get up in the morning and I can't wait to get to work because I can't wait to see what poem am I going to use here. And yeah, I think as an adult I would have enjoyed a book like this with my own kids, because I love poetry and I love a good story. So I guess it satisfies a lot of things I would love in a book, but hopefully what you would love and others would love, or maybe not even know they had never experienced that kind of a poetry book before. Yeah. Because I think if a book is written poetry, we envision a certain type of poetry. Like I grew up on Dr. Seuss, and I love Dr. Seuss, but there's very much a rhythm and to the poetry that the rhymes at the first and the third line, or the second and the fourth. I mean, the basic formats. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I hope the fun I had in writing it comes out to the reader.
Yeah.
Too.
I'm curious, did you have a difficult time deciding which poetry form to use to tell the different parts of the story? Or did you sit down and say, okay, this is the fourth poem and I'm going to use this form? Or was it more like, I want to talk about these emotions and I think that particular form would be a great way to express those emotions?
Yeah, a little of both, I think. It's been so long since I wrote it, actually. I think I first learned some of the different types of poetry, and then I tried to flesh out a story. So there would be an arc. How would it begin, and what would happen in the course of that story, and what would be the high point of conflict, and how that would be resolved. So I kind of started with that. How do I tell a full story? So I wrote out the details of what would happen in the life of a child when the family welcomes a new baby, to the point where the baby is able to interact and they become really good friends. I used a poem in two voices for that one. So I fleshed out the story, and then I looked at the formats, and in some cases I would try one format and tweak around with it, but certain ways, like what would be a poem that might need a line that keeps coming back up in different parts of so a refrain, something where the child is, it feeds that part of the story where you need that refrain that keeps drawing it back and making it cohesive, that piece, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And
sometimes I'd start one and it didn't really work well, and then it just worked for another one. So a lot of it was just playing around and tweaking and using up a lot of paper, because I like to write by hand when I'm working with poetry. So it was a kind of a combination. I didn't really set out and think this poem's going to be this, and the number 2 will be this, and number 3 will be that. It was sort of, here's the piece of the story I want to write. I need to do it in one poem format. So what one fits best, that piece of the story.
Great. Yeah. Tell me, is there one poetry format that you struggled with, you got through, you wrote the poem, it's in the book, and then you said to yourself, I ain't never going to write with that form of poetry again in my life?
No. I think I'd like to write in all those forms again, plus more. I'm still surprised at how many forms there are. So as a next book, writing in this same format, I think I want to try mostly new things, but it wouldn't be impossible to come back to some of these that, if it fit the story, I think that's the most important part. How do I write what fits the story and makes it flow? So I'm going to play around with some new things, but I may go back to one or two that I had a special fun with. So, awesome. And I always liked limericks, so I made sure there was a limerick in the book. And I thought a limerick is kind of a silly poem, funny. So that has to be a part of the story that I can tell in a funny way. And then there's some poems that seem a little more serious formats. And so I guess it all depends on the next story I write and what it needs. Mm-hmm. I think every story benefits from having funny, sad, interesting, thoughtful pieces to it. Yeah. Different moods.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Tell me, Kathy, where can people go to find out more about Since the Baby Came, and also find out more about all the books that you've created?
Oh, yes. I think this is number 51. So I have a website, www.kathleenlongbostrom.com. I have 2 Facebook pages. One is Kathleen Long Bostrom Author, where I post always things about my writing and books and promote and share books from friends, because I think that's important to do as well. So I have the 2 Facebook pages, one under Kathy Bostrom and the other under Kathleen Long Bostrom, author. So you can always go to those and find things. I'm on Twitter and Instagram and a lot of things that I don't know very much about, but trying. The publisher too, if you go to the website for the publisher, Waterbrook Multnomah, which is a big word. It's a division of Penguin Random House, but they do a great job of promoting the book. Where you go to the website, you look it up, and then they show some inside views of the book, and they share a few of the rhymes, and they tell a little bit about it, so you can get a really good feel for what the book's going to look like, and just a few more sneak peeks, which I think is fun. It makes it like, ooh, sneak peek into the book. I think I like this book. I love the illustration. The artist is from Wales, Janet Samuel, and I think you can follow her on the sites as well. So I follow her on Instagram, and I just love seeing her art. So those are the main ways, I guess, is websites, Facebook, social media.
Yeah, awesome. We've had a really fun time speaking to the author of Since the Baby Came, a siblings learning to love story. And our guest has been Kathleen Long Bostrom. Kathy, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much. I could talk forever, and I'm impressed by all the other interviews I've listened to on your site. I think I'd want to encourage people to do that. Well, in fact, the last one I listened to was a person I had met, Dorina, at a writing conference. So it was really fun to hear her interview and hear where her life is these days and good things happening. So anyway, thank you for including me in that lineup.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Nick Ullo. She'll be back to the podcast to celebrate her brand new picture book. It's called Out of the Blue, and it is out of this world. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our guest, Kathleen Long Bostrom. Please check out Since the Baby Came, a siblings learning to love story. Also want to thank our sponsors, Zoe Twit. Her books are fantastic. Adelaide and the Cosmic Rescue Squad, Adelaide on Broadway. I also want to thank the Toner Twins, Jim and Brad Toner. Please check out their wonderful books, especially The Journey, Life Lessons with Diane the Turtle. I want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Ann O'Leary, Madison Vieras, Soji Franklin, Monica Rivera Sosa. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.